This is Trijicon's offering to the world of magnifiers. It is a Filipino-made 3x magnifier that is simply called the Trijicon 3x magnifier. There is no weird name or sort of gimmicks with it, and when I first got it in hand, I was kind of taken back by that. Usually there's a name or some sort of variant of model, but this is simply called the 3x magnifier. One area that I really have to hand it to Trijicon is their boxes. As you saw earlier, this is made in the US. The box, that is, and they have a very nice presentation using that eggshell foam, which holds the optic in there very nicely. As far as features and whatnot that you'll find in the owner's manual, you'll see that it's pretty sparse. There's not a whole lot to it because, again, this is just a 3x magnifier with a QD tilt-away mount. There isn't a whole lot of specialty stuff going on, with the exception that it is very small. And I will be putting this side by side with another 3x magnifier to give you a representation of just how small this thing is. Despite its small stature and being made in the Philippines, it has a really good feel to it. The mount is very solid, and it does look fairly reminiscent of other mounts that I've seen in the past, but it overall just has a nice little chunky, stout, chode feel to it. Yes, I use the word chode in a sentence in regards to a magnifier. Touching on the base a little bit more, it's got a really good feel to it. It's got a nice lock system, and the detent pin on the side that you adjust the tension for your QD lever for your pick rail is pretty nice. It's not anything extravagant or over the top, but it's perfectly fine for the roughly $400 that this costs. Unfortunately, despite the fact that everything on this thing from the outside perspective feels good, there is a lot of play to the rear diopter adjuster, which I am not the biggest fan of. The rear eyepiece, the looser it is, the more likely it is in my mind to have dirt, water, and BS come inside and damage it. As far as the elevation and windage turrets on this, if you're curious as to why there's adjustments on a magnifier, it is so that you can center the dot through your view of the magnifier after you've centered your red dot on your zero at whatever distance. So don't get confused. This is only to have the red dot appear centered in through the magnifier. As far as how the turrets sound and feel, well, there's almost no sound, and there's almost no felt detent. You can see from the way I'm turning this, it turns almost smoothly, but it is very hard to turn, so that is at least nice. You don't have to worry about this thing losing its zero under recoil or hard use. Despite the small size of this Trijicon 3x magnifier, it still maintains about an ounce off the average of most 3x magnifiers, which is around 10 ounces. For comparison's sake, this is a Eotech G33, also a 3x magnifier, which comes in just about an ounce heavier, but is substantially larger. But is size everything? Is weight truly everything? We're going to find that out soon. But just to give you a comparison, if you're really looking for a very small, fairly lighter weight magnifier, the Trijicon is a decent option. Also, doesn't that mount on the Eotech look oddly familiar? Kind of like we're seeing it with double vision right now? I guess most companies just find something that works and use it. Anyway, let's get behind the Trijicon and see what it's like to actually use. Taking note before we flip the magnifier down of just what it looks like before we look through this thing, it's a pretty decent day, a little overcast, but overall not that bad. Flipping the magnifier down, and we have very nice looking colors, good brightness, and a very decent view looking through it. We do see a decent amount of the scope body, but as you'll see momentarily, we could push this a little bit farther forward and see a little bit less of that. However, at a slight cost to a much smaller exit pupil. Through the magnifier itself, as you see it here, it's got a very nice looking image. But unfortunately, there is a flaw, and the flaw comes in the form of fisheye. It's a little hard to see right here, but as we pass through this power pole, or rather pass over this power pole left to right, you'll see that it just warps on the side ever so much. There will be more on that later, but for right now, let me show you what it looks like when we move it one pixel closer to the eye. The image basically becomes unusable. Moving it back to where we first started, and we have the same image clearly, and one farther forward, you can see we have a wonderful image looking through it, very similar to what we had before, but with less of the scope body. Unfortunately, it's very tight on the eyebox and exit pupil at this point. The exit pupil gets very small, and thus you have much greater limitations of where you can move your head to be able to look through it properly. I grabbed the rear eyepiece and wiggle it around to show you that there is some movement back there. It's not the end of the world when you're looking through it, but again, the more movement I see there, the more likely it is to break. Moving it one pixel farther forward, we still have a decent looking image, but you guessed it, the eyebox basically becomes useless. You need to still have a great cheek weld behind this thing. While we're on the subject of the Eyebox, let's look at it in a more dynamic approach, here just floating around it, and truth be told, it really isn't all that bad given this thing's size. This is about an inch shorter than a G33, so the fact that we're able to even move around a little bit and still be able to look through it, it's pretty impressive. As far as putting it with an optic in front, this is with the Promethean LP1. This is the largest windowed red dot that I have. I do not have any holographic sights anymore on hand, but I will be changing that in the future so this way we have the clearest possible optic to look through it. Again though, note the distortion on the black berm above the targets. There's a big belly in it, and that is the fisheye I was telling you about. So, it is there and it is apparent. It's honestly so far the worst thing about this thing. Because I had at the exact same time, here is the G33 doing the exact same Eyebox test. Please take note of that black part of the berm where it's completely flat on top, like a beautiful piece of granite stretched across your kitchen. It's gorgeous. You will be seeing more of the G33 soon when I do a full side-by-side after we finish going over the Trijicon 3X as a whole, but let me put the LP1 back in front of the G33 and show you what it's like to look through real quickly. It's not bad. It's decent, but you can still see we have a window looking through it. Keep in mind, folks, that it doesn't matter how good your magnifier is. If the optic that you're putting in front of the magnifier has shitty glass or a small window, it could compromise the entire system and give a really bad performance. So yes, there is distortion to this Trijicon 3X. And yes, to my naked eye, as opposed to the camera that I have currently set up on this thing, I did notice it much more than what is portrayed to you on video. So take that for what it's worth. Something that's usually small and lightweight or marketed as such typically has some sort of inherent flaw. For this thing, it's the distortion. And it's unfortunate, but it is there. For some of you, it might not mean a lick of difference. You might not even notice it unless someone points it out to you. For me, that stuff jumps out at me and I can't take it all too well. Fortunately, when we put the LP1 in front of it, the LP1 has significantly better glass than a lot of its other competitors at that price point, and as you can see, there's almost no loss of image quality, sharpness, or colors when we look through it. There is a slight bit of blue tint, but it really isn't terrible. What you're seeing now is me adjust the windage on the magnifier to see if it operates properly. More often than not, I've been behind magnifiers where you adjust the elevation and windage to center the red dot in the image looking through the magnifier, and they move both the image and the dot at the same time, and it forces your head to have to crane over it because it changes the exit pupil location. With this, it does that very minorly, but more or less it gets the red dot in the center perfectly fine. And again, the controls don't sound great. They don't have a good detent, but they're nice and hard to turn, so you don't have to worry about it moving on you once you get it in the proper location. Taking a more close look at the sharpness of this thing when we start going side to side to get out of its main viewing area, and it's nice to see that both the reticle of the red dot and the image behind it stays sharp and clear until you literally can't look through the thing anymore. So at least the glass is fairly stable in that regard. Going from the LP1, we're going to now switch it up with my Holosun 512. You can see there is a significant larger amount of tint on the 512 as opposed to the LP1, and the glass doesn't look as sharp. It's still a decent image, but it's nowhere near as sharp as it was with the LP1. The reticle also isn't as sharp, and it just isn't as good of an overall experience. Like I had briefly mentioned before when we were looking through the G33, it doesn't matter how good your magnifier is. If you put an optic that is subpar in front of it, you're not going to get great results because you're going to magnify not only the reticle and the image behind it, but all the imperfections with the red dot that you're putting in front. So definitely keep that in mind. I think it's about time that we put this thing side by side with some of its competitors, and the first one's going to be the most expensive option that I've recently done, which is going to be the Eotech G33. The G33 comes in around $600, apparently is made in the US, comes in about 4.5 inches long. The eye relief, however, is smaller. It's closer. It's 2.2 inches versus the Trijicon's 2.6 inches, which is primarily why we see a larger view through the G33 as opposed to the Trijicon. As far as the overall field of view at 100 yards, there's only about a half a foot difference between the two. The Trijicon claims 37.75 feet, and the G33 roughly 38.3. So it doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it does translate to a bit of a difference. The biggest, however, is going to be the view looking through it. The G33 is larger, but again, it is going to be much closer to the eye, about a half inch closer. Here, roughly at the exact same target distance and location, you'll see that the area to the right of the telephone pole and below us, below that roof line, is more or less the same. Again, it's only about half a foot, 6 inches at 100 yards. That's not a whole lot of difference. What this means is you are going to have that G33 much closer to your eye, which means you're also sacrificing distance out front, which means that red dot's going to have to be closer to the overall magnifier. However, also keep in mind that the G33 is much longer, so the magnifier is going to be pushing that red dot farther forward. There are some trade-offs to this. For me, I'd probably like my red dot to be a little bit farther forward anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But if you like having your red dot closer to your eye without it being magnified, then you're going to definitely be deciding between one versus the other on that basis alone. However, there is a $200 difference between these two. The Trijicon on the left, again, is about $400. The G33 is about $600. One's made in the Philippines, one's made in the US. There are a couple of key differences between them that would sway someone to go with one versus the other, despite everything I just said. For me, I would pick the Trijicon over the Eotech simply because I hate the turrets on the Eotech. There's no reason for them to be not only quick adjust, but non-locking and non-detented, and they're very easy to turn. But the glass is very, very, very good on the G33, and the fact they are at least assembled in the US does make me very happy, even if there is a $200 price difference. Overall, I think I prefer the Trijicon as an overall package, but that fisheye is a little bit annoying. But is it worth 50% more for the G33? Well, that's up for you to decide. For me, though, that $200 price savings can buy you this next magnifier, the Holosun HM3X. Am I seriously comparing a $200 Chinese-made optic to a $400-ish Filipino-made one? Yes, I am. And the reasons are they're actually very similar in specs, yet again. The eye reliefs are basically about the same. There's about an 1/8 inch difference between the two. The length is only about a 1/2 inch longer than what we see with the Trijicon, and the field of view is about a foot difference. But let me ask you something. Can you notice the difference when we get these both on target? The view through the HM3X is a little bit larger but negligible. However, the image is flatter on the HM3X. I've seen it time and time again. In fact, this has been my standard go-to magnifier when I'm reviewing a red dot scope. It's that simple. Yeah, it's a Holosun. Yeah, it's made in China. But at least the price isn't $400 for a Chinese-made optic. It's $200. And you can find them on sale for like $150. That's really, really cheap. No, I don't have them in the perfect location because these were not filmed on the same day. But I do have to give it to the Trijicon. I do think its raw overall sharpness and clarity does eke out over the HM3X by a tiny margin. I'm not saying that it's by such a large margin that you're going to spend twice the amount of money for the Trijicon over the HM3X. But if you value a product that's made in a country other than China, or maybe you like a certain brand like Trijicon, then that's definitely going to steer you in one direction versus the other. Me personally, if I had to choose between these two, I think I would trust the Trijicon just for the namesake alone to be a little bit more robust than the Holosun. I have seen a bunch of these break, and for a $200 scope, it's unfortunate, but it's almost to the point where it's more acceptable if it breaks. And Holosun doesn't have the greatest warranty. They are slightly delayed. Usually takes them a couple of weeks to like a month to sort things out. Trijicon does at least have a decent warranty. I've just recently had to send something back into them again, but more on that when I do another overview of the Trijicon warranty setup. Between these two, which one would I personally buy? Well, I do run the Holosun personally for all of my reviews because it's a very good low budget magnifier. But again, there's a big price savings there. If I had to go with something that I might trust a little bit longer to like hard use, it'd probably be the Trijicon though. But see, Holosun makes a lighter, smaller version of the HM3X, and that is the HM3X T. Yes, you are correct. The T stands for titanium. Do I believe it's titanium? You wait for the full review. I'm not really 100% sold on it, but this is much more in line with the Trijicon 3X as opposed to anything else that we've looked at already. Just like with the standard HM3X, both the field of view and the eye relief are the exact same. 36.7 feet at 100 yards and about 2.7 inches of eye relief. The price on this, however, is up $100, so it costs $100 more at around $300. and the overall length is only 5/16 of an inch longer than the Trijicon 3X at just over 3.2 inches. So, really, really close to what this Trijicon is, all things considered. Unfortunately, though, like I had mentioned earlier, just because something is smaller and lighter and more compact does not mean that it is going to still perform as good as its larger counterparts. Typically, when something is a quote-unquote lightweight compact version, usually gives up some sort of, how should I say, performance aspects in other regards. For my findings with the Trijicon 3X, as for an example, it's got more fisheye than anything else. For the HM3XT, it's got a much smaller Eyebox to it. It's much tighter, and more on that on the full review coming out soon. But between these two, which one would I get? The Trijicon 3X. For $100, or actually less than $100 more than the HM3XT, you're at least getting a Trijicon product. It's made in the Philippines. It does feel better in hand, and it's still going to be a little bit shorter and a little bit lighter, and it's going to have a better mount. The HM3Xs come with good mounts, but not as good as the Trijicon or with the G33 that we saw earlier. Again, this is only because the price difference now is within $100. So it's still savings, but it's nowhere near as much of a savings as opposed to going with the standard HM3X instead of the Trijicon 3X. At that sort of price point, definitely go with the Trijicon. It is a slightly better package, and it does have a better Eyebox despite the fisheye to it. So there you go. A definitive answer. So there was a digital gremlin that definitely got in my system because I had filmed more footage for this and the G33, and both have since been sent back to their respective owners, and I cannot seem to find it. My large bore segment and my nighttime segment are both gone. Very, very disappointing to say the least, but I can say with confidence that both this and the G33 performed well in the lower light environments. Truth be told, I was a little bit disappointed to see how much slop there was in the rear diopter, but it's not that bad. Obviously, if it's good enough for Trijicon to put out, I'm going to hope that their quality control and their quality checks are decent and, to a point where they're not going to put out garbage. But guess what? Anything is possible. And keep in mind, this is a serving size of 1. I only get 1 scope per reviewing cycle. It's not like I'm buying multiple things or I'm being given 3 from 3 different people or 3 from the same manufacturer. It's just not how it works. So what I'm seeing might not be what you're seeing on your end. With the rear diopter slop out of the way, I do like this thing as an overall package. It does feel really good in hand otherwise. The mount is really nice. The size and weight is smaller than average, and the price is reasonable for what you're getting. I'm pretty sure if you took the Trijicon nameplate off the side and you threw something else on here, it might be a little bit cheaper. But honestly, 375-ish bucks from PA right now for this magnifier isn't that bad. The only real negative is the fisheye. The turrets, I'm perfectly fine with. Do I wish they had a loud click detent? It would be nice, but it's completely unnecessary given how magnifiers are supposed to be set up and operated anyway. Overall, I do like this thing as a package. And if you're on the fence about getting one, I would just say do it. Going with the Holosun, you are going to have to question its overall longevity. They are pretty good, but you're still buying a $200 or sub-dollar magnifier. This at least has a little bit more heft to it, and that's something I can absolutely get behind. So, with that, thank you all very much for watching. And as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you can still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.